of reviewing and putting a new common agricultural policy in place. In the past, European Union, and certainly in the recent past, European Union food policy and agricultural policy was about deliberately limiting food production, to keep prices artificially high in the European Union so that we could pay farmers a bit extra for the food they produce because we ask them to produce food under conditions that costs more. And I would never make an apology for the assistance that farmers get in terms of income support and in terms of price support for the food that they produce, because they are being asked to produce food under conditions that are very different to most other parts of the world. European politicians, driven by European consumers, demand traceability. They demand food safety. They demand farm inspections. They demand the limitations on the use of hormones, for example, in beef and meat production. And all of the other things that we have insisted upon for Irish agriculture over the last 20 years, which a lot of farmers have been frustrated by because of the bureaucracy of it and because of the cost and time elements of it. But it is because of that that we now have a phenomenal product to sell across the world that has a label on it which says quality, which says safety, which has a promise of a consistency of high quality output that consumers and countries will pay more for. But that type of artificial pricing within the European Union to actually compensate farmers for requiring them to grow food to a higher standard than in other parts of the world is not really an honest policy in terms of the future of the common agricultural policy any longer. Because the price of food outside of the European Union, in terms of many of the commodities we're dealing with, have now caught up with European prices because of demand. The idea that we can continue to produce expensive food in the European Union and we can simply supplement that by importing cheap food from other parts of the world is also outdated. Because the food isn't going to be there to import in many cases in the future. If you look at Russia in the last 2 years, they've shut off grain exports because they need that grain for their own domestic economy. If you look at beef exports out of Argentina that have practically stopped because they need to keep Argentinian beef primarily closer to home. If you look at the trade deals that are being negotiated between Brazil and China at the moment in terms of supplying China with beef in the future, challenges the assumption that the European Union can simply import all of the excess demand that we have here amongst consumers. And so the issue of food security in terms of ensuring that Europe has the capacity to feed itself in the future and can contribute to feeding other parts of the world also, that won't be able to produce enough food to feed themselves, now must be a major feature of the common agricultural policy. And all of those drivers which are outside of Irish and European control actually benefit where we want to take the Irish food industry. We want to be able to export more. We want to be able to target premium markets for a premium price that actually demand what we produce, which is safe, high-quality food. And those markets are there and they're growing. And even if we were to quadruple food production in Ireland, we still couldn't come close to meeting the demand in those markets. So what we need to focus on now as a country is what segment of world markets and European markets for food demand do we need and do we want to target as a food-producing exporter? And that is what we are doing at the moment with our Food Harvest 2020 plan. And that is why it is so important that farmers understand that it is not about simply producing a high-quality product to sell to a processor, but it is about producing a high-quality product that is going to end up on a supermarket shelf that a consumer is demanding and will pay a little bit extra for. Because we're all part of this food chain. We're not different segments. And that is what is so exciting about the Food Harvest 2020 document, which was one of the great things that was produced under the time of the last government. It was primarily driven and written by stakeholders, but it was facilitated by the last government, and they did a good job in doing that. And I intend on actually taking that document and that blueprint for growth and actually implementing it. and actually adding to the ambition of it when and where appropriate. And the agri-food sector is unique in the Irish economy, in that it has an extraordinary reliance on political decision makers, both at home and in the European Union, as well as the private sector, as well as highly influential and important sectoral interests like farming organisations who are here today, as well as arms of the state and commercial semi-state companies who are represented here today. All of us together impact on whether or not we have a successful future for the food industry that maximises its potential. And for the first time, we have a template that everybody buys into. And that is a hell of a start. We actually have a document which sets out where the Irish food industry should be if we exploit our potential in 10 years' time. And not only that, but we have working documents and a working coordination group who meet on a regular basis to actually drive the change that needs to happen next week and next month and next year to ensure that we meet the targets of 2020. Food Harvest 2020 is not a political document that is sitting on a shelf. This is a document that is in the boardrooms of the biggest food companies in Ireland, and it is in the back rooms of pubs where small groups within the IFA or the ICMSA are meeting and discussing, and it's in the research labs of Teagasc. And it's on my desk. I look at it first thing every morning when I walk into my office in the Department of Agriculture. We have a business plan that all of the stakeholders are buying into. And if any one of those stakeholders starts to fall behind, the other stakeholders focus on that and insist on pulling those people along with them. So as we prepare in the primary production sector for milk, for example, to produce more milk in Ireland, to have a rapid expansion and growth of milk production in volume terms after 2015, it is up to all of us to ensure that the processing sector has the capacity to be able to process that in volume terms, because currently they don't. Because they've been in a straitjacket in terms of expanding volumes since 1984, when quotas were in place. So we need to ensure that the processing capacity is there to deal with the extra milk when it comes. We need to ensure that we have new markets to actually sell that milk, or that milk powder, or that yogurt, or that cheese, or that ice cream, or whatever other byproduct or added value product that we have in the dairy sector that needs to find a home outside of Ireland after 2015 when we start producing more, so that we avoid milk lakes in this country after 2015. We need to ensure that primary producers, if the processors are going to spend huge sums of money to increase their capacity to process milk, and if big food companies like Kerry and Glanbia and the Irish Dairy Board spend money on finding and developing new markets in anticipation of 2015, we need to make sure that the primary producer is geared up and ready to actually meet the challenges that are set for them also. And all of this is happening at the same time in a coordinated way. And everybody is contributing to the conversation. And that is the kind of joined-up government that is required, that I would argue hasn't been there in the past, to develop the true potential of this sector. And it is going to be needed if we're going to meet the kind of extraordinary demand for food, and if we're going to be ahead of other countries who are already exploiting the extraordinary increase in demand for food and have left us behind in some of the areas. And if you look at the dairy sector again, back in 1983, before quotas were introduced, Ireland produced the same volume of milk as New Zealand did. We both produced around 5 billion litres of milk a year. Ireland now produces 5.3 billion litres of milk a year. New Zealand produces over 16 billion litres a year. In terms of world markets or world trade for dairy products, next year, New Zealand will trade more dairy products globally than the entire European Union will. That's the result of the quota system. So the upside of the quota system is that it has, by and large, guaranteed price stability, with the exception of 2009, which was a disaster year, and which we need to learn lessons from. And so that's the upside of a quota system which manages supply to drive demand to keep prices at an acceptable level. But the downside of it is, now that world markets have actually caught up with us in terms of price and demand is insatiable, that actually we have been left behind in terms of the volume development and the efficiency that goes with that by countries like New Zealand. And we now have the opportunity to put a plan in place, learning from the mistakes that New Zealand made during that expansion. And there are plenty of mistakes that New Zealand made during that expansion. Learning from those mistakes, we need to put in place a plan of action that can actually result in a phenomenal growth success story for the food sector, not just in dairying, but in the other sectors too, over the next 10 years. So that is why I am energized and excited about the job at hand. And I hear so much, people say to me all the time, even this morning, I hear you've got a good news story today. As if to say, they haven't heard a politician talking about a good news story for 4 or 5 years. Well, here we have one. Let's talk about it. Let's build it. Let's build our reputation. Let's talk about food and the expansion, the potential expansion of the industry. Today, I'm launching this document. It's called Milestones for Success. And just in case anybody thought that the Food Harvest 2020 document was a document that was written and published last year and really we're just going to judge its success in 2020, we're going to be producing one of these documents every year to show the progress we've made over 12 months, to set new targets for the next 12 months in areas like working collaboratively with the public and private sector to make things happen, and there are lots of examples of that. Looking at innovation in operation, a lot of it being provided by Jerry and the Teagasc organisation, along with Bord Bia, BIM and other arms of the state. Looking at smarter farming, how we upskill farmers, and Rowena spoke about the success of dairy discussion groups in the last 12 months. There's now 6,000 dairy farmers meeting 4 or 5 times a year, comparing notes, discussing best practice, trying to improve the efficiency of each other's farms, because they're not in competition with one another. We are price takers in the milk business as farmers. We're not in competition with each other. We're about trying to achieve economies of scale by putting farm partnerships in place at a production level as well as at a supply level. That's what we should be about anyway. And we need to do what we've done in the dairy sector as regards discussion groups. We need to replicate that in other sectors, whether it's niche areas like the production of malting barley, or whether it's bigger areas like the suckler herd. Some of the suckler farming in Ireland is incredibly inefficient, and some of it is really good. And we need to be putting those people in a room together along with Teagasc advisors and other scientists and actually helping people to improve the efficiency within their own farms so that they can maximise their income from the markets, and then they can have their income supplemented by the other income supports that are there and available to them. Looking at developing leadership and entrepreneurship, looking actually at the research that's required to really understand what consumers want in terms of food demand. And that isn't only in Ireland, by the way, because 85% of the food that we produce needs to be exported out of this country. And about 95% of the new food that we're going to produce under Food Harvest will need to be exported and have a new home found for it outside of Ireland. And so Bord Bia and other bodies need to be researching what consumers want in Germany, in Beijing, in Bangkok, in Sydney, in the United States, and all of the other markets, some of them quite obscure. And I'm going, for example, with Glanbia to Algeria in a few weeks' time, because they're opening up a new plant there to try and exploit demand and markets for dairy product there. So this is a living document that is changing and being upgraded all of the time, and the players involved in it are as enthused as I am, or at least the vast majority of them are, from what I've seen to date. And that is a project that is steaming ahead and will continue to become, in my view, a major positive story within the Irish economy. Outside of the food harvest document, which is very much the driver here, we of course have to ensure that both the Common Agricultural Policy and the Common Fisheries Policy are negotiated in a way that suits Ireland, that allows us to produce more food, and that financially supports the kind of farming infrastructure that not only is intact in counties like Cork and Kilkenny and Tipperary that have extraordinary potential to increase yields, but that it also supports disadvantaged areas, hillside farmers, farms that don't necessarily have the potential to increase yields, but nevertheless absolutely have the right to continue farming and to be supported in their farming activity, regardless of what part of the country they're in. So my responsibility as a Minister for Agriculture, as far as I see it, is twofold, and this will determine how I spend shrinking resources when it comes to budget time. It is on the one hand to facilitate the extraordinary potential within the food harvest document and to gear people up, whether that's from a research point of view, whether it's from a capacity and upskilling point of view, or a market research point of view. I need to fund that and make sure that it continues apace, but I also need to ensure that we fund people who don't have the capacity to take advantage of this potential, but who are an absolutely central part of not only the rural economy, but also rural society in Ireland, who are people who have the responsibility to actually produce food, but also look after the very precious countryside that we have, whether it's hillsides, whether it's common areas, commonage areas, or indeed whether it's fisheries harbours, and so on. And so those two parallel responsibilities are taken equally seriously from my point of view, and they will be the basis upon which I make decisions if we have to cut expenditure in certain areas in order to protect other vulnerable areas when the budget is launched in early December. Can I say, as regards the Common Agricultural Policy, there are a number of things I'd like to say about it at this stage. First of all, in terms of the actual amount of money that will be available for the Common Agricultural Policy budget, I think the starting position is a reasonably good one. I think we can argue and fight for more, and I think we need to. But 6 months ago, or 8 months ago, or certainly 12 months ago, most people were predicting that the CAP budget would be reduced in actual terms by somewhere between 20 and 30%. We now have a starting point for discussion and debate that means that the budget for 2013 for the Common Agricultural Policy will be maintained in actual terms into 2014, 2015 and on for the lifetime of the next CAP round. Now, in effect, it is in real terms a reduction each year because it doesn't increase with inflation. It's not index linked as a payment. But from a farmer's point of view, the actual amount of money that they have been getting over the last number of years in terms of single farm payment is likely to remain more or less intact. But there will be some new elements, and there will be some new asks and new requirements of farmers in order to draw down that full amount of money. And maybe someone's objecting there, are they? Not surprising, because I'm about to talk about greening. And for those of you who've studied the CAP likely proposals, essentially what's being spoken of at the moment is that single farm payment will remain intact, but it'll be a different form, and a third of the single farm payment may well be attached to what's called requirements under greening mechanisms, and that's a fancy European way of saying that they're going to require farmers to farm in a more sustainable and environmentally friendly way. The good news around greening from the discussions we're having with the Commission at the moment is that most of the requirements for environmental farming are already in place in most Irish farms. It'll be looking to support a percentage of a farm remaining under permanent pasture, which is what most of our farms have already. It's looking to arable farmers to actually have a crop rotation plan in place to ensure that there are break crops put in place in between cereals and so on. So that type of pragmatic but sustainable farming is by and large what we're talking about in relation to greening, but this is going to be an ongoing process. There are other issues in terms of redistribution of funds between member states that haven't done so well and have done too well from the CAP in the past. And again, Ireland has positioned itself quite well, more or less on the average in terms of how countries have done from CAP payments in the past. So if you see a shift of resources, predominantly from west to east within the European Union, Ireland's payments should remain more or less stagnant, which is good news. There's also a debate and issues around how we actually spend our national envelope of single farm payment if and when it's granted in the future, whether or not we would have to make a payment on the basis of a per hectare payment, which is what some people are advocating, or whether we can make payments on the basis of historical payments and how single farm payments have actually developed in Ireland. These are all things that will be discussed over the next 18 months to 2 years, as indeed we will have an equally interesting and lively discussion around the common fisheries policy in that timescale. And what's so interesting from an Irish perspective here is that we are going to take the presidency of the European Union for the first half of 2013. Both the common fisheries policy, the common agricultural policy, and indeed the financial perspectives of the EU budget, if you like, for the following 7 years. They're all due to be agreed by the end of 2012. But understanding the European Union as I do, they're all likely to spill over into the start of 2013. So it will probably fall on the Irish presidency to get deals and to get compromise and agreement amongst 27 countries on the European budget, the common agricultural policy and the common fisheries policy. And there's an extraordinary opportunity there for Ireland to rebuild its reputation internationally and at a European level as a country that can actually bring people together to find solutions that are in the interests of 500 million people across the European Union. And I am relishing that opportunity to actually do that, but also to do it in a way that actually secures Ireland's interests in terms of how payments are made, who they support, giving countries the necessary flexibility to recognise that actually food production is different in different countries, and indeed that different countries have different priorities. The chairman is looking at me now, so let me just finish by saying just a very small bit about fish, because I just couldn't come to Donegal. I couldn't come to Donegal without saying something about fishing, because the food debate is often dominated by agriculture and indeed the food processing sector and the food sector around agricultural-based products. And actually, I'm as excited. Let me just. I've just skipped through some of the other slides there because I know we're tight for time, but I can answer specific questions if people want to ask them in terms of how we're going to add value to food and how we're going to produce more food and so on. But I just want to say a little bit about seafood. This county is the biggest driver for the sea fisheries sector. Towns like Killybegs, Greencastle and others have a positive future. And it really irritates me when I hear people standing up in the Dáil and people writing in newspapers that that the fishing industry is over, that it's been let down, that it doesn't have a future, and so on. Fish exports out of Ireland increased last year by nearly 15%. It hasn't been that bad a year for fishing in Ireland. Yes, we have a constant debate and fight and argument around how quotas are allocated both within the European Union and indeed within Ireland, and that will go on. But there are huge opportunities for growth and expansion in the seafood sector, and we are working on them. Whether it's getting foreign fleets to land more of their catch in Irish ports so that our processing sector can grow and expand, whether it's growing an aquaculture sector, putting a licensing system in place that can ensure that we can do that in a sustainable way, whether it's moving large-scale aquaculture fish farming offshore to produce the kind of volumes that are being produced in countries like Scotland and Norway at the moment. Last year, Ireland produced 12,000 tonnes of farmed salmon. It is the most sought after salmon across the European Union. I went to a seafood expo in Brussels a couple of months ago. It's the biggest seafood expo in the world. There were 19 Irish companies there, many of them from this county. They were all getting criticised on the same issue because buyers were coming to them and saying, what are you doing here if you can't sell me the volumes of fish that I need? And so the demand for seafood in the European Union and outside it is absolutely extraordinary. We import 70% of the seafood that is consumed in the European Union. 70% of it is imported from outside of the European Union at the moment. That's the market that's there for us. If we can expand and grow the volumes of fish that we produce, and if we can add value to those fish here on this island, whether they're caught by Irish trawlers or not Irish trawlers, it's still an opportunity for growth and expansion. Whether they come from wild fish stocks or whether they're farmed, it's still an opportunity for growth and expansion that we cannot let pass. And other parts of the world, in order to conserve wild stocks of fish, have moved to aquaculture in a major way. If you look at China again, China consumes 93 million tonnes of fish each year. 75% of that is farmed. 75% of that is farmed. That's about 65 million tonnes of farmed fish each year. We are at 12,000 tonnes of salmon. In Scotland, they're at 150,000 tonnes of salmon. In Norway, there are 1 million tonnes of farmed salmon. And within the next 5 years, they will be 2 million tonnes of farmed salmon. So Ireland needs to get its act together in terms of what it's doing. And we need to do it in a way that is sustainable and acceptable to coastal communities, to fishing communities. And we can do that. And we have started the process for doing that. And in the meantime, we need to continue to try and negotiate for improved quota share for our own fishing fleets, and we need to manage how our own fishing fleets operate in a way that is sustainable and can support growth and expansion, so that towns like Killybegs in 10 years' time are progressive drivers for a local economy as they have been in the past and continue to be. So I'm running out of time here, but I want to thank you for the invitation to be here. I hope you get a sense of optimism and enthusiasm from me around the food sector. This is an extraordinary opportunity for us together as a country to build a reputation for quality food production on this island, north and south. And that reputation can be such an extraordinary supplier of income to this country in terms of the export potential that's there, which is almost infinite in demand terms. This is a sector that at the moment is worth 24 billion euros to the Irish economy, 22 billion of which stays in the Irish economy, unlike most other sectors. We are an island of 6 million people that produces enough food for 36 million people. Our target is 50 million, and to move beyond that. That's the journey we're on, so please buy into it. Thank you.